Adam Fennessy, thank you for joining us on the IPA 2019 Annual Forum podcast series.
Thank you, and I'm very excited to be here.
Adam, thank you. And tell us a bit about this session that you've just come from. This really, it ties in very well with your history of public purpose, doesn't it?
Yes, I think so. And I had spent 20 years in the public sector, particularly in Victoria and in the Commonwealth Government, and now I've been in consulting for 2 years. So I've seen it from both sides. And what I have found and what we discussed today is that you do get so much more when you open things up and bring in other voices, other perspectives. That's the benefit of diversity. But in a professional sense, when you have public servants working alongside not-for-profits, community groups, corporates, consultants, you do get a diversity of view if you can design it in the right way and always think we're here for the community and we're spending taxpayers' dollars, then you can get amazing outcomes. So that was the real theme today. And what was great about the panel is we had someone with deep not-for-profit experience in Karyn. We had Lisa with her perspective from the corporate and governance perspective. And what I was trying to do is bring both perspectives. I've been a public servant and I still feel very committed and passionate and talk like a public servant. And now I'm actually working in a consulting firm where we work with. So that's what we were hoping to get out of today, and I thought the discussion went really well.
Well, it's a pretty amazing perspective to be able to kind of come from all of those different environments. And do you think that actually was highlighted today, that you can cross over these boundaries, that there's no dark side, dare I say, or that we can all kind of work together on this?
I think so, and I hope so. And one thing I remind myself, and I often will talk about, is that ultimately we're all people. We're all motivated by purpose. When we talk about the community, we're part of the community. When we talk about making a difference to people who are disadvantaged or improving our environment or, fixing up our traffic so we can get home quicker, we're both public policy makers and we're citizens. So I like to think, well, we're all people, and where the best partnerships I see work well, and this is the private and the public partnerships coming together, is where we think, well, what are we trying to do here? What's the purpose we're trying to achieve? That's motivating. And frankly, having a profit driver if you're a corporate, or keeping your minister safe and happy, at the end of the day, they're not as motivating as making a difference to communities. And the other thing I particularly love about what we talked about today is Queensland does present a unique proposition in that it's, here in Queensland, we're a very distributed state. We've got lots of major regional cities. We've got a really big and interesting southeast Queensland. There's a lot of challenge, growth, environment, mining, all sorts of, a bit of everything, and a government that's really committed to innovation and community. So in all of that, it's an exciting place to be in public sector or in the public purpose.
And good
space.
to have those regions involved in the discussion today too.
Yeah, I thought it was great that there was that live streaming. And before I moved to Queensland, because I'm a proud Brisbaneite now, I was in Victorian government, and I was the only Director General or Secretary who was not based in Melbourne. I lived in Bendigo, I worked out of Bendigo, and that put me closer to regional communities, and it's very down to earth, and people will tell you really quickly if they think you're doing a good job or not, and that's great. And your own staff will do the same.
Pretty refreshing. Very refreshing.
They cut straight to the point, and particularly I did a lot of work in environment and planning. Everyone had an opinion and a view about that in regional parts of, in that case, Victoria.
Reminds me of my days as a journalist in the country, I think. So what do you think, Adam, would be the important things for the sector to take home today, and for professional service firms as well, to take on board really for delivering some of these important public purpose programs?
Well, one of the really good conclusions that we reached at the end of our panel session is do the upfront work. You've got to develop your relationships with your private partners, your not-for-profits. You've got to spend time to trust each other. So trust is very important. And secondly, the ability to get a good outcome it's so much greater at the start of the process, particularly if you're going to engage consultants before you sign contracts. Work out what you really want to do and think about the purpose drivers, not just the contract. Contracts are very boring, but we're here to improve this community, or we're here to improve that landscape. That's motivating. So the upfront discussions in partnerships are critical, and you get so much more exciting innovation from the diversity of who's in your team. So the other message is that the public sector talks a lot more these days about public purpose, which is that broader network of people all working together to get stuff happening that's going to be good for us.
And that collaboration is actually really crucial. It might be time consuming, but it's worth it for the end result.
Yep, and people often say to me, it just takes a lot longer to make all those phone calls before the meeting or talk to people and listen about their ideas. Yes, it takes longer and it's critical. And the art of listening is often a forgotten art. If you listen properly, particularly in the early days of a partnership, then you really learn what you're there to do, and you get a better outcome.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Adam. Is there one final aspect that you'd like people to remember from our podcast series today?
Well, yes, there is actually. When I was in Victoria, I was on the board of IPA Victoria. IPA Queensland plays such a critical role for the health and the strength and the excitement of the public sector here in Queensland. So I really want to encourage people to get along to IPA Queensland events. I'm a big fan of IPA. You meet interesting people, you get great conversations, you get great perspectives. So in terms of IPA Queensland, I want to thank them for the opportunity to be part of this today, and I want to encourage our listeners and your listeners to get along to IPA events, network, meet other people, get excited.
Be part of that supportive network.
Correct.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Lisa Siganto, thank you so much for joining us on IPA 2019 Annual Forum podcast series. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Nance.
So, Lisa, can you tell us a bit about this panel that you were on today? What were some of the points that made you excited, I suppose, to reflect on now looking back?
That's a really good question. I think that we all had themes in common and we could speak for each other, and that was really fun. We didn't really have to go, but there's this. Everybody understood, even though we're working in different sectors. Yeah.
No, exactly. I was thinking that because you're all from very diverse fields, and to have that commonality was great.
Yeah.
And a bit of a small example of what you're really trying to achieve in the wider community and show that it's doable.
Yeah, I think we needed a bit more time to give examples of what we're doing and why we're doing them. So we tried to squeeze those in, and we tried to refer. So it was hard to jam pack it all together.
You're such an expert on this interactivity of organisations. Do you think that there was a good discussion on that today? I mean, you've been on the front line getting battles for funding for these things.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it was. And I think the audience questions were spot on. So that was really good. It was we hadn't really talked about corporate. We hadn't talked about procurement and contracts. I think something we didn't cover, which, we didn't have enough time, but was about board structures and how do we, with organisations and boards, how do we have the best boards making the right decisions in this sphere?
And you mentioned the corporate there. You even spoke of some examples there. That Johnson & Johnson one was interesting.
Yeah. So, the whole corporate relationship, partnership, and what's in it for them. And the other end of it is I heard last week with some Indigenous organisations that have spent a lot of time with corporate foundations, coming in and having sponsorship programs and pouring lots of money onto stuff that is only really relevant for the corporate and not super relevant for the longevity of the organisation. So really, when you're starting, you need to work out where are the aligned interests. And it might be a corporate that's completely, very, very different to the community services organisation that you're partnering with, but what's the aligned interest? We had a great example about 5 years ago where we had Stronger Smarter Institute, which is about Indigenous education, and we had a coal seam gas company, coal seam gas, QGC, and we worked out how to have basically a $500,000 contract to work together on something that was meaningful to both.
So, and it shows once you start from that common place, the issue, the problem, then you can get all of those different sectors on board. Is that really the
Yes,
approach?
I think so. I think in that case, it was really sort of 3 sectors we got together, so it wasn't multi, and I've the asylum circle example I talked about on the panel is a really complicated, multi-organisational collaboration work. I think what you find, even on a one-on-one, a corporate and an NGO say, that right at the beginning you've got to really work hard about how you understand each other. And with the Stronger Smarter example and a coal seam gas company, they're pretty different. And to understand and to have our people understand each other, like how do we get our people at Stronger Smarter? Some of them were Aboriginal facilitators who are used to really rough conditions. They're prepared to go through rough conditions to teach and educate in remote community schools and would drive 10 hours to get there, versus QGC, who were very, very tight about their safety of their people. And because they were investing in this program, had tight safety conditions, which meant that no one could drive for more than 2 hours. They had to have a snack and some water packed for them, and total of 6 hours. And that, those two ways of doing things were totally different. And we nearly had, a huge alarm go right through QGC that we were not doing the right practice. That's a long story, but that's what was happening.
The details are important. So it made me think too of what Karyn Walsh mentioned from Micro Projects as well, to involve people from the beginning and not just halfway through or at the end.
That's right, and to listen. And I think, we often, from a corporate background, which is where I originally was, we're focused on tight project management and deadlines and getting to that point. And you need to take the time, and it costs money, but you need to take the time to listen and understand. And if you want people working together, you've got to work up that respect, which isn't going to happen by having a Gantt spreadsheet and milestones and you have to deliver by 10 a.m. on Friday.
Remembering the faces of the people.
Yes,
that's right. In the project.
That's right. And I think one of the things which I said was, even if you're super, super busy, still connect with who the target client is, because if you don't really understand them and you don't keep coming back to them, is this getting fixed? Is this helping? Then it's not worth it.
Lisa, thank you so much for your reflections. But is there a final takeaway that you'd like people to have after the conference for our podcast listeners?
I think the idea of giving it a go is probably the right one, and also that there is no rocket science on this. It's sort of like a marriage, it's got engagements and giving it a go, marriage is giving it a go. You have no idea really how it's going to turn out, but if you're committed to it, but you've got to give it a go. If you stand back, it's not going to happen.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thanks, Nance.
So, Karyn Walsh, welcome to the IPA 2019 Annual Forum podcast series.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your very important reflections of working in this sector for 40 years. I think we know you as a very fierce advocate. You're very well respected in this industry. It was interesting to hear your points about how perhaps we could talk to people working on the ground, such as yourself, and in the sector, at the beginning of a project, not at the end. Would you be able to expand on that a little bit as well for us today?
Oh, look, I think that often the community sector is involved, or we can be involved in the beginning, then there's long periods of silence, and then there's a tender. I think we need to get back to the days where tenders weren't the focus, really working together at, well, if we want a solution, what's the work we need to do to put that to the powers that be or to the ministers in maybe 3 years' time. I think when we're always talking around what will ultimately be a competitive tender, it doesn't draw the best out of anybody. And that if we could actually look at problems, social problems that we want to solve earlier, and not just be focused on we've got a funding round that's going to come up, or we've got to get this into the budget process because we've got to, compete, because everything's competitive. I mean, we know the budget room's competitive. Every minister wants what they want for their portfolio. So I think we need to, there was a day when we didn't just focus on the money because there wasn't as much money.
You do remember
but the problems were much
changed
smaller.
Right.
The problems were smaller. So you had the time to process that. there's an urgency to some problems now, and often you're managing a crisis that maybe the government's got, but the reality for the people is quite different.
So almost a more organic approach in a way, like really kind of from the problem up, it sounds like.
Yes, I think you've got to listen to all voices. It's no good pitsing saying, oh, well, we'll just listen to consumers, or we will just listen to service providers, or we just listen to government or corporates or researchers. You actually need everyone to come around the table and give their insight, because most of the issues we're trying to solve, they're not homogeneous problems for the individual. They may look like homelessness is a problem that everybody could get in and solve. However, there's a really complicated background to why people become homeless. It's a whole of population issue. Everybody at any age, any time facing adversity could suddenly not have somewhere to live. So, it's like, how do you have these conversations not just as part of funding bids or tendering process? And I know, government has its cycles, but it would be good to create a cycle where, we sort of had a goal that we wanted to really research something thoroughly, or have an innovation pool that you could use to actually facilitate those conversations with what you need to reflect on.
And integrating all those services, even in a big place such as Brisbane or a wide place such as Queensland, in a way similar to some of the people that we've heard from today, that Toowoomba homelessness group, the hub that they'd formed. Is that something that we can, I suppose, replicate here, that maybe we could get mental health services?
They've replicated it from other places. Like, the problem is that these things don't seem to have sustainability because of a change of government or a change of direction, and what we need is to really put the glue in, put the investment in that keeps it together, and don't take it away. I mean, I remember the days when we had a hub in Brisbane that had 5 organisations. It was, but then it couldn't, the money to sustain the capital wasn't there, and it went. And there's been other initiatives across, we've all worked on hubs over many years. The key ingredient is that there's cooperation, but there is the investment to match the reality of what you're trying to do. You can't just do it without that investment that sort of brings people together, gives you the capital infrastructure, gives everyone the time to be able to sit down and talk with each other, whether that's about individuals or whether it's about, some local trends that are happening in the community.
Sounds like that funding is really such a big issue. It must be such a battle, really trying to get the funding for such a visible issue such as homelessness. But I suppose, as you say, there's so much going on in the background. Even as I think of the latest trend with a lot of older women who are becoming homeless, there's all societal factors behind that also need to be.
Well, of course, women haven't had as much superannuation, issues with the death of a partner or a separation late in life. Women tend to support their families financially, even their adult children. So there's all sorts of factors that are contributing, and simply the affordability of housing.
So just treating that one aspect is not going to, we need to make that public purpose partnership and really take it as a serious ongoing project.
I think we need more flexibility in what we do. We can't just have these one size fits all. You've got to give NGOs flexibility to use resources creatively, and you've got to have accountability for that. You can't just say, oh, here's the money, do what you like. It's really, how can we be accountable but also ensure the flexibility that you need to be responsive. And I think government has got a lot better at that in some of the funding models, but it's something we've got to keep in mind all the time.
You mentioned also even some private partnerships which have worked quite well, which is, I think, an important thing to remember as well. I think Johnson & Johnson was one of them. Is that also
Lisa
key?
mentioned them. I mean, we've had, GrowCon during the global economic crisis, built Brisbane Common Ground at cost. Through the economic stimulus money. That was a great contribution by GrowCon. CUA provide us with assistance to give women secure financial access to their banking, and have funded us for a couple of years to assist women with financial counselling, which has been amazing in being able to reduce the debt women have from domestic violence. And, really having a vision of women being financially independent and sustainable is something that needs to be parallel to women's safety, because you can't be safe if you don't have your own financial capacity and access to products. CUA has built a new product for women experiencing domestic violence.
Are you pleased that the public sector is coming together, though, to look at how it can do this more practically?
I think that people who work in the public sector share the same frustrations. We've got different realities. I think partnering requires us to respect those realities. We all have different views of the world. More than ever, we're a diverse society with different views about climate change or homelessness. It doesn't, it's not like you just think, we're just going to solve this problem. I remember the days when homelessness used to be a few men in a community with an alcohol problem, and the answer was, well, let's give them a place to stay and give them good food. But, that's no longer the reality that we're talking about. So both on population scale, geographic differences, and just the different roles we each have to play. We have to reflect as not-for-profits. What is our role? How do we have to change and adapt? How do we work together more, as well as how we work with government? And most importantly, I think for a democracy, it's how we make sure that independent voice of lived experience has a place in policy. And governments should never be telling not-for-profits they can't speak about the realities that they're working with.
Well, and that has become more of a trend, hasn't it? Which does make it difficult.
I think, Well, if our democracy's going to grow, everyone's got to be able to take criticism,
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Karyn. Are there any other little takeaways that you'd like to end or take for people to think about after the conference?
Thanks for the invitation to be here. It's always good to reflect on things like this, and it sounds like everyone had a really good day. So,
thank you, Karyn.
Thanks.